Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rebel Diva Show. I think we're live. I go live every Tuesday at noon PDT or Pacific Standard Time, and to talk about some of the topics that most of us are interested in, all to do with how can we create a career that is that follows our passions, and then not just creating the career, but how do we maintain that at a very high level. So today I have a special guest, Lynn Whitbeck from Seattle. She's from Petite to Queen, an amazing organization that does mentoring and workshops to women around the world. So she and I will get together once a month. Once a month, it's on a Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the month, to talk about some of the questions that come up when we are dealing with trying to create a career, or perhaps to change into a career that will give us the happiness and all the things that we're looking for. So I see a couple of people are watching. I'm still waiting for Lynn to join me. So until she does, I will want to share with you, if I'm looking to the side, I'm looking at my laptop on the side to make sure that I look at comments and know who's in, who's out, and where everybody is. So those of you who are watching, put down where you're from and say hello. So I can see that who's there. And I'm still waiting for Lynn. I see Amanda. Hello, Amanda. It's really nice to see you. And I don't see Lynn, but let me see if I can find a way to get to her here. Nope, I don't see her. Lynn, if you're watching, please make sure you're on your phone, because that's the best way to connect. And anyway, so I'll tell you a little bit about the Rebel Diva group that I've created here. We are more up to 100. I believe it's 110 Rebel Divas, which is super exciting. And I know Michaela Kate, who's helping me with admin and taking a look at making sure everybody's welcomed into the group. She sent a beautiful note with a cake picture to welcome everyone. Now, the purpose of this group is to share a lot of the nuggets and tips that I share in my books, the Rebel Diva books. And there, I see Lynn. Wonderful. Okay, let me see if I can get you in, Lynn. I was just introducing, let me see if I can get you. I think you're on very soon. Okay, so Lynn, how are you?
I'm doing good. How about you? Sorry, I've been here since the beginning.
I've been trying to keep stewardship here. So for some reason I didn't see you, but you have a beautiful background, by the way. Are you in your garden?
I am. I thought it's a beautiful day here, and
yes,
I moved it outside.
I love it. I love it. It's a gorgeous day here. I think I'm just a couple of hours away from you. It's just beautiful. Every time I get on, I have to say, it's another beautiful day in the Pacific Northwest. People are going to start all wanting to move on to this part of the world. But
I hope, yeah, it is beautiful.
It
just
is.
Have to put up with a little bit of rain.
That's true. But we don't worry about. That's good for the trees, right? So how has your week been, Lynn?
It's been interesting. So, just the usual. So how about you? I mean, you were just in Port Townsend.
I was. It's a gorgeous trip. I did partly to see a friend, but at the same time, I wanted to take a look at the neighborhood and see if there's something that would stimulate my fiction writing that I do. And Lynn, I am on top of the world today. I came home to an email last night saying that I have been a finalist for another literary award.
All right.
And this one is called the Eric Hoffer Award. He's a philosopher in the States, and it's a pretty prestigious literary award. I guess if you buy regular books, like So this is a little prestigious. So I'm still in awe and shock that they would even consider one of my books. But anyway, so that's my news, and super excited. We'll see how it goes. And even if nothing else, just to be a finalist, I'm thankful.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous.
So
your books have won a lot of awards.
Well, I think they've been nominated. They won a couple, but they're nominated quite often, you know, and after a while, it's like, you know, you see people in the Academy Awards, they're all waiting for their name to be said. And then they go around saying, I'm the Juno losing award winner, whatever. But no, I'm happy. I'm very happy. It's been a journey. But let's tell everybody thank you, Amanda. Thanks, everybody. Oh, before we start, just want to welcome everybody who's watching. And please tell us where you're from. And then, Lynn, would you like to introduce the topic for today?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got my little notes here. So we were going to talk about, from last time, sort of segued into how to approach difficult situations with grace. And I think it's one of those things that there's so many different types of difficult situations. They can be at work, they can be interpersonal, they can be personal, they can be, it can be a situation that is difficult because there was an error or a mistake and you're responding to that, or you created the error or mistake and you have to answer for it. So those could both be different sides of the coin. So I think there's a lot of different scenarios here that we could go in, but there's I think you and I both agree that there's some core tenets or guidelines that you can follow that can help you. And certainly when we're talking about your career, which is a lot of what we do at Petite to Queen. We're very focused on providing mentoring, the programs and tools for women so they can achieve more faster. And some of this is, you know, how to respond to these difficult situations. And I'm going to just write out, don't take it personal. And that's one thing that's really hard, I think, for women, is that we might internalize it or take it personally. And so that's the number one thing, is it's really about what's occurred or what the circumstances are, what the situation is. And so it's sort of like solve the problem, you know, work towards solving the problem. Sometimes the problems are big and they have to be taken bite by bite to get through them. But I mean, that's my first. I mean, what do you think?
Well, you know what, being the anal, I came up with a 5-step process.
Okay, great.
I stood back and I decided, look back at my own experiences, and have with all the different places I worked in and also in different cultures. One of the things I realized is, regardless of which sector, culture, country I worked in, the process is not that dissimilar. And so I have this 5-step process, but I wanted to very quickly, before I go there, and we can go through this. We've got a half an hour to capture everything. I wanted to give a few examples, Lynn, so anyone who's watching can understand the difference between what we did last time and this time. So I have some examples. You might have others, just to put it into context. So the first one could be initiating a tough conversation, could be asking a raise from a boss, resolving a conflict with a colleague, and you brought that up. It could be something a mistake that you've made. We are human beings, but we need to address it, or a mistake someone else had done, or a conflict you have with a colleague. How about, Lynn, asking someone for support and help? Isn't that a difficult it shouldn't be, but it's difficult. I find it difficult to ask for help. So I think that's one of them. Another one, especially if you're starting out, and I know your community, Lynn, they're just getting into their careers. I think speaking up and disagreeing with everybody around a boardroom table or at a meeting, that can be a little difficult to do, right?
Yep. I'm going to move this.
Sure.
So we're more head to head.
Oh, perfect. Beautiful. Lovely. Nice. And then couple of other things that I went through, and so I guess on my side, I have an audience who have been in their jobs for a while. Some of them are managers. So I have 3 difficult conversations that we initiate as managers when we do annual performance reviews. That's not some of the time, when you have a star employee, it's very easy. But when you have somebody who's struggling, that's not an easy thing to do. And it's not just annually. As a manager, you need to be giving performance. You need to have conversations on a regular basis as part of your communications and your connections as you go through daily work.
Right.
So addressing performance issues, and it doesn't have to be, oi, this is wrong. It is, hey, what do you think? Can we do it in a different way? There's so many ways to address poor performance. And then finally, I'm sure, Lynn, you've gone through this, and I've gone through this. Initiating the toughest conversation for me was to fire people that were just not aligning with the organization's values or the team's values. So those are some of the examples. I just wanted to say that everything we talk about, we can apply in many different work environments.
Oh, absolutely. And the same goes for personal relationships. This is all perfectly crossover.
Very true. That is so true, isn't it? So the skills, we can take it to our home as well. So I have my 5-step plan. How do you want to go? Maybe I'd like to ask you. So the first thing you said was, and I have it here as well, do not take things personally. But what's the first step on your, if let's say you have to initiate that conversation, Lynn, that you'd say that we need to do to prepare ourselves?
I would say the very first thing for me is to always acknowledge and to see the good in the other person. So that even if it's a case where you were in the wrong, and sometimes there are no right or wrong, right? It's just perception, or it's how things worked out. So but you always want to look at the other person and really recognize that they're another human being. They're most likely trying to do their very best, and they want to be, let's say it's a performance issue, they want to be doing the best and that they can do. So and even when it's a difficult situation, maybe that person, you have some conflict with them, or you have very different styles, to really start there. For me, what about you? Where would you start?
I love that. I love that. I didn't have it here, but I love that. Seeing the other person as a human being who's only trying to do their best and approaching it that way. I love that. Well, the first thing, my 5 steps, I'll go through them very quickly. The number 1 is to clarify your objectives, theirs. Number 2 is to plan the conversation. This might sound a little in-depth, but especially if you're trying to do performance analysis. So ask for a raise. I think it's important to think things through. So clarify, number 1. Plan the conversation, number 2, and then ask questions and start with questions at the beginning and listen. And then the 4th one is to negotiate. And I think every conversation, whether it's you asking somebody asking their kid to wash the dishes, that's a negotiation to some extent. And then finally, it's to follow up, right? It's you don't just have one conversation and it's over. Going back to what you said at the beginning, Lynn, I always like to think you try to build long-term relationships, and you're not just going there for whatever the goal and running out, because that's how you can build a better work relationship. And so those are my 5, but I just want to talk about the first one. Before you're going, especially if it's a really tough conversation, don't you think, I think it's really important to understand your objectives. Like, what am I trying to achieve? If you don't have that figured out, that's not going to be the most, I don't think you can have a very clear conversation from there. And on that clarification is, what's my objective? What am I trying to achieve? But what's the other person's interests and perspectives? What might be their goals? I think that's the first step.
Yeah. I mean, for both of you, you're getting to what's the why. And so your why and their why, and where's the common ground. So I would agree with that. I think another thing to think about, I mean, you said this before, but for both of you, even when you're starting this conversation and you're doing the planning, which is your second step, I think another part is to think about what's holding you back from having the conversation. What's your fear? Because that's a really common, sometimes having these tough conversations, you've got to think about, well, what's the worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario? And then what's likely to happen? And So that, to me, that sort of goes through maybe that sort of moving from your why to the planning, but that helps that whole clarification process. And part of the challenge of having difficult conversations is, a lot of people don't like conflict. And so by addressing that, going through that whole, what's the worst thing that can happen, and really looking it in the face and sort of addressing that fear, it's going to move you closer to being able to have the conversation. And then so that, it's not really about conflict. You're looking for a mutually beneficial resolution. Obviously, depending on what the situation is. If you're going to terminate someone, that's a little,
but even then,
you still want to do it with their respect,
exactly,
and dignity, so that they have something to walk forward with. And obviously, it shouldn't be a surprise.
Exactly. No, absolutely. And I like to think that even if you say goodbye to somebody, and this could be in a personal or in a professional relationship, you do that with the thought in the back of your mind that you might meet this person again in life. And there might be maybe that opportunity didn't pan out, but it could be a whole something else. And usually I like to think that there's always a position for everybody, and it doesn't have any, and you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Here, I've been fired, Lynn, in my 20s. Somebody said, no, you don't fit in, goodbye. Best thing that happened to me. But I think so I don't think it's a negative thing. And I think if you can go back to the first thing you mentioned about the other person, thinking of the other person as a human being and what are their interests, I think that's you've covered the foundation where you're starting with is very solid, right?
And I agree with you. Not burning bridges.
Yes.
Looking back, there's, I can literally count on one hand the number of situations where, in my mind, the bridge is burned, but I never actually burned it. But it's the type of, I wouldn't go back or welcome those people back into my life.
Yes.
So, but I've, to this day, I can pick up the phone and call somebody I worked with 30 years ago. So it's really that long term that you're looking for. And you're right, situations change. You can also go from situations that are really good and they really work in a certain circumstances and a set of parameters, and then you completely change gears and all of a sudden they don't work. And the dynamics have changed. Time has gone past. People, evolve and grow and alter as, time passes. And suddenly it just doesn't work this time. And it's the opposite. People that you didn't work with very well, maybe early on, and suddenly 20 years later, not only can you get along really great with them, but you have a lot more common ground now. Just from life experiences. So, I think keeping that door open, or at least cracked a little, is important.
I love it.
If you close the door, open a window.
I love it. Even if it's a tiny window, unless it's toxic, that you really don't want them in your life. And I think, and I've said goodbye to people in my life, professionally and personally, where I said, no, these are my boundaries and you've crossed them. I've given an opportunity for us to have a conversation. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. There are 8 billion, it scares me, people on this world. So there's enough friends and colleagues and employees and employers to go around. But I want to...
No, I agree. And I think to disengage. But once again, it's not necessary to bomb the bridge. You can keep the bridge closed and the gate down. Absolutely. Because like I said, there's a handful of people that thinking of a fort, those gates are closed to those people, but I still parted amicably, professionally, and leaving them with, and myself with, dignity and respect. So
right. Well, you mentioned the word grace in the headline, right, Amanda? I think maybe it's you who put it there. But the word grace, if you can approach all those relationships with grace, without having anyone take advantage of you or walk over you, making sure you have that balance. I think that's where the magic lies. But I want to go to something you said earlier, Lynn, which I think is really important, especially when it comes, and I hate stereotyping women, but I've seen this again and again where we tend to avoid conflict more as girls,
Yeah.
especially we're taught, well, don't fight, be nice, play nice, and that doesn't help. While boys are said, when they fight as little kids, they're either encouraged or it's just boys being boys. And so we grow up to avoiding conflict, thinking it's a bad thing. And that is probably one of the most, I think that leads to some toxic behavior, because I have found that when I ignore a problem or I try to avoid conflict, it festers, it becomes bigger than it should be, and it doesn't serve the other person, other party, it doesn't serve yourself, it doesn't serve the work you're trying to do. So avoiding conflict, now some people say, oh, I just turn my other cheek and walk away, aren't I great? No, you're hurting yourself. You're hurting the other people. You're not living authentically. That is not, and if there's anything I'll say strongly, and maybe it'll come out harsh, is do not ever avoid conflict. There are ways to resolve things, but when you avoid conflict, that's what breeds toxicity in my experience anyway.
You're planting a bitter seed if you avoid the
Yes.
conflict. And you're
Yes.
right. And that seed is going to take root and it can grow. And then you explode when you least desire to do that. So I think that I do also believe that you have to choose your battles. And there are
Yes.
times where you want to flex to someone else's style and you're going to go ahead and just say, let it go. But if it's going to plant a seed of bitterness, you really need to address that, both for yourself and for them, for the health of the long-term relationship. And I think this is a case where words matter. They help you frame the discussion. And so how you approach it is so important, so that you are not attacking them personally. You're talking about the situation. You're talking about how you feel. And you want to get to that, what you were asked, the why. So you can ask them, tell me more, help me understand why they do something a certain way, so that you can find that middle ground or common ground, or find a solution that's mutually beneficial. So I'm really, jumping on what you said, that it is so important. And I agree that conflict is tough for women. And what's ironic is that sometimes we have it easier at home in our relationships. Not necessarily. It depends on your upbringing and how that all went. But for work, being able to speak up, not only for yourself, but that's something that you do. It's a learned skill. Boys have been encouraged from the time they're little to speak up. And we unconsciously do this to our children without any intent. It's literally how we've been socialized. And it does. It takes active, conscious efforts to say, I want to hear your opinion. I value what you have to say. I may have a different opinion, and I may want to go with what I had already decided on, or was thinking. Maybe not, the decision isn't like made in stone. If you've made the decision in stone, it's sort of like, why are you asking someone's opinion?
Right. Then it's a different conversation.
Them. Yeah. So it's really adding no value. So but you can always say, hey, this is where my frame of reference is, and this is where I'm starting out, and this is where I feel like we should go, or how it should go down, but I'd like to hear your input and what your thoughts are. If you agree, and if you don't, what's your why?
Absolutely. No, I love what you said about picking your battles, because there's some issues that aren't worth pursuing. And we need to be wise in what we address. And there's some things that are just personality differences, right? That we should just walk away and be a bit tolerant, but not too tolerant of bad behavior. That's important.
There's a fine line, absolutely. Yeah, and I think I've got actually a great story about bad behavior. Because it fits into this. So, because I had a situation with not my supervisor, but actually like the president of the company. So I reported to the right under that. So this was early on, but the president completely lost his temper over a project that had gone sideways. It was one of my projects, but I'm not the one who pushed it over the edge. I was, and I wasn't aware of the situation until I got this call, and he was screaming at me over the phone. He had other people in his office who were actually the people who had pushed it over, but he was yelling at me using really foul language. And so here I was, and I'm going like, all right. So, I mean, I could have just completely, taken it personally and like, stop, why are you, sobbing or whatever. I could have gotten really mad. I did get angry, by the way, because I was being treated like this, which was completely unprofessional. However, I let him talk it out, and I asked a few questions. I was trying to, sort of de-escalate the situation, but I would use a powerful pause several times, so I wouldn't just start talking. I'd sort of listen to what he had said, and I tried to come up with a couple ideas for solutions to see if we looked at this as a possible solution. And throughout that, I also was trying to get to a point where I could disengage without hanging up on the president, right?
Right.
So I got through that situation, and I was like, by the end of the call, I was shaking, that I had been the recipient of this really very unprofessional behavior of this individual. And so I called my boss, who reported up to him, but I did let him know what had occurred, and that it was completely inappropriate behavior, and that it was the first time I'd ever encountered this type of behavior from this individual, but it was the type of behavior that should be reported internally, because it was just off the charts, and no one should treat another person that way. And so we had a good conversation. It was really healthy, but it also let me say, I had some ideas on how we might solve the problem. So I segued right into solutions. So it wasn't a call where I'm just whining and complaining. I didn't, don't burst into tears. I did take a few minutes. I first called my husband, and I vented on my husband, and he helped me calm down, right? So I called a trusted resource. And then I immediately followed up with addressing it. And in the future, I really, he never talked to me that way, the president, ever again. It never occurred again. And I realized that people can lose it. I mean, that whatever else was going on that day, this was just it just made him so angry that he lashed out, and I was the unfortunate recipient. But it did color how I looked at that individual to this day. And because it was way beyond just losing your temper and raising your voice and swearing. I mean, this was this giant, intense dumping that went on for, I mean, he was I was literally holding the phone, as far away as I could, and still hold on to my iPhone, because he was screaming so loud, or whatever the phone was at that time. I know it was still a cell phone.
We had cell phones at one point still.
Yeah, so,
right.
But, it was, so something like that, once again, my recommendation, you use those powerful pauses, and you disengage as quickly as possible, and without escalating the situation. But you can disengage by saying, I need to think about what you've said. I need to take this in. I want to really consider how we can find a solution, whatever it is, so that, or, I really, this is important. This is an important conversation and I want to hear what you have to say, but I'm getting really upset and I need to take a step back. I need to, take a few moments to gather my thoughts so that we can get together. Let's talk about this in an hour or 2 hours. And that also lets the other person bring it back down as well. So anyway, that was just sort of a story that sort of went with this difficult situations topic.
No, I think that's great. Oh, I think that's great. No, thank you for sharing, Lynn. I think that's a wonderful experience. What I loved about your story the most was
it wasn't wonderful. It was horrible.
well, it's a very relevant. How's that?
Yeah,
it was
a
very relevant
real
story. It's very real, and I'm sure it wasn't fun going through that. But what I really liked about that story is you don't just, and coming back to the topic that we are talking about today, you didn't just go through that experience. You turn around and said, okay, how can I solve it? And find the right people. You had your trusted resources so you can get the emotional piece out of the way. And then you went back straight into focusing on the problem, not the person. Sometimes the person is the problem, but in this case, you talk to your boss to say, and I'm just repeating this because I think that's magnificent, and it's not something that everybody does. I haven't done it. The first thing you want to do is to go and gossip and yell and scream and get emotional about something that happened to you. But if you can turn it around and go through the steps of how do you clarify and what we talked about earlier, how do you plan, how do you get to resolving that problem, that's a huge step. Now, would you think that comes a little bit with experience? If you are, I remember in my 20s, I had a conflict with a boss and I just lashed out. I vented like crazy. Now, when I look back at it, I'm embarrassed. And you know what I did, Lynn? This is really embarrassing. A few years later, I left him, went to another job. A few years later, something triggered that memory. I went and bought the most expensive bottle of Canadian ice wine. I don't know if you know, ice wine's really expensive wine that and I went back to his office and said, hey, you taught me a good lesson. And we became good friends after that. But just the way I reacted was so disproportionate because I was reacting emotionally and I didn't have those skills to solve the problem in a mature, rational, in a way that solved the problem without focusing on the person. So good on you. Well, it took me a bottle of ice wine to figure that out.
Well, and even in this case, everyone deserves a second chance, right? In this case, this person, well, in most circumstances, it does depend. I had a very much more distant, but maintained a professional relationship with that president until he left the company. So anyway, but yeah, it's tough. Sometimes when you're in those situations, and even in that situation, it was like it was the behavior that was inappropriate, and so when you try to take that emotional context out and put a buffer in there. So it's not that person, that he was evil, but his behavior was inappropriate. And it's actually something I use a lot. I've always used with my daughter. She's not bad, but her behavior is not correct, is not to the best of who she can be. So it's really addressing something different than, I'm not addressing or attacking the person.
No, that's very true, right? And even words such as thinking of the person as you are a bad person, or what you did hurt me, or what you did here was a result of your actions, not you as a person. Right. Somebody comes to me and says, Tikiri, you're just a very mean then it becomes personal, and then I put a barrier up. I'm no longer listening. But if you come to me and say, Tikiri, when you said those words to me yesterday, that really hurt me. That did not serve my needs, your needs, that hurt the project. Now you've got my attention, and you haven't hurt me that I'm feeling offended or insulted. So that's very smart. On that note, I have some very practical ideas that I wanted to share because I would love to hear
Okay,
your
yeah.
thoughts on these, Lynn. When the examples we gave, whether it's asking for a raise or trying to
Right.
resolve a conflict with a colleague or speaking up or whatever it is, that you initiate, you have an added advantage of deciding when and how to approach the discussion. So
Right.
you can decide, do I want to ask a raise in my boss's office, or do I do that over a cup of tea? Or, there's so many ways now. You might not have a lot of leeway, but if you can, you have the opportunity to think about a lot of things. So number one is a physical space. That does matter. I find that there are certain conversations that don't do very well in someone else's office. Maybe you need to remove them from their comfort zone, take them somewhere else, and have that conversation. Another thing, take them out for coffee, right? And have it in a neutral place. Another thing is the timing. Do you want to have that conversation in the morning when they're fresh, in the afternoon when they're tired? You make that choice. So how you react during those different times of the day. And the third one I have is who else will be there, right? Do you want to have, like you mentioned, your boss yelling at you, and when there are other people in the room? I would suggest that was not a very wise thing to do on his part, because that shows him in a bad light to everybody else.
Yeah, no,
regardless of
they were
right?
both shocked. They were both shocked over the whole situation. And but I had separate conversations with each of them, about it. So, and we just sort of push forward, saying, hey, this was uncomfortable and icky for all of us, but how do we take care of the situation at hand, and how do we fix it? So
Right,
yes,
right,
I
right, right.
interrupted you, but yes,
So
I agree with those.
yeah,
Those are all important things, when you're thinking about the context of what you're doing. And another thing is to not keep putting it off, thinking that there's going to be a better day, a different, time to bring something up, and to have the discussion. I mean, there are times when it's important to delay something, and I'll share yet another personal story where I had a very difficult conversation, and that was when my husband and I had to tell my daughter that he had terminal cancer, and our daughter. And so in that case, we found out about a week and a half before the end of the school year, and so we did not tell her. We wanted her to wait until she finished, because she was a junior in high school, and you know how that's always an important time. It doesn't matter, but we chose to wait to tell her. And so that was a time that we purposely delayed a conversation, because so sometimes there is something that there's timing that's going on. Maybe there's a really big project at work, a huge campaign that's going out. So the conversation, like to have a raise, is going to be a real distraction. And this is so like a huge launch or something. And so waiting until that's done might be a better option. And you're going to be able to add in how you contributed, the value that you brought to that project, and how that translates to a better compensation package. So, in that scenario, it all sort of works together in the context.
Yeah.
But there are, I think that choosing your moment is important. But there are also times when you can't. You're just thrown or pitched into a situation, and so that's where you, I think that how you respond is really important. And to your point, asking those questions, tell me more, help me understand what's happening or what's happened, and what do you have any ideas on the best approach to fix this, or to correct the problem, and their short term, what can we do right now, and then we can dig deeper to the root cause so that it doesn't happen again. So once again, sort of framing that conversation.
I love it. I love it. So on top of the physical space, the timing, the people around you, you need to also choose your language and how you approach it. I love it. I can't agree with you more. And even and similar to that is not just the just being able and training yourself to listen, right? I think that is important. That when people know that you're listening, they tend to respect you more. I'm presuming that, when the president was yelling at you, he knew you were listening, but there was no, there was no, uh, you know, that's a little extreme example, but I find that when you show people you're listening, they tend to calm down, or they tend to have a better perception of you, and the conversation becomes smoother. Now, again, this is all couched in you do not tolerate toxic environments. There are certain times when you just go, no, that does not work, and you walk away, or whether you wait till the end and then you take the right actions, as you very well did. So we have to always make sure that we don't cross the line. And the reason I always bring up extreme examples, Lynn, is because in my own work experience, as well as especially other women, we tend to take a lot more than we need to.
Yes.
So stop it when it feels bad. And like we said earlier, if you have a problem, you resolve it immediately. You don't wait till tomorrow or the week after, because then the other person could have forgotten, and then you are now approaching something, and it's like climbing a hill with a boulder on your shoulder, right?
Yeah, I definitely, and I agree that the other thing is to stop talking. I talked about using the pause, but if you stop talking and you pause, it lets them gather their thoughts and how they're going to respond. And it also, that pause can help, like I said, it can help tone a conversation down that's escalating. And sometimes for when we just keep talking, and the other person's trying to think and process what's been said. So, I harp on that a lot, and it's because it's a lesson I've had to learn. I'm just a talker, and I've had to learn to shut up. And the other trick with listening is to repeat back something that they said, because then it's acknowledging that you've heard something, and repeating back something that, even if someone's ranting or raving at you, but something that has some validity, that you can, that, okay, this is the nugget, this is the core issue of the problem. And so that you tell them that by repeating that back briefly, that you've heard them. They are acknowledging what the value and the validity of what they said.
I absolutely love your powerful pause mantra. I love it. And do you
learn the hard way?
But do you also find that when you pause, people listen to you more? When they want to know where you're coming from, what's going on here, what's going on in their mind, and you get their attention. It's a good way to establish a bit of credibility and depth with just a very simple 2-second pause.
Yep, you're setting up the next thing you're going to say. So, yeah, it's like it's like the music before the opening credits or something. I mean, it's just setting the scene for the next thing you're going to say.
What a powerful way to do it, right? Lynn, I'm going to very quickly find out if there are any questions. And I have to refresh the website every time.
I know, and I'm gonna look at my notes. So I have one too, which is speak to their values.
Yes, I love that.
So this is, because once again, I mean, this goes back to a situation that I was in. It was really difficult because this peer was treating my team inappropriately, and it was a really tough situation because I couldn't allow it to continue, and I needed to have this conversation, but I didn't have I wasn't her supervisor, I wasn't her boss, etc. And I really thought about it a lot on how to approach it. To your point, planning the conversation, I planned it offsite at a lunch, but I spoke to her values and who she perceived herself to be and who she wanted to be, and that right or wrong, someone else's perception was real, and this was how my team was perceiving her behavior, and I knew that that wasn't who she was. And so, and it helped a lot. So, I think when you can approach it in that way, and then that was one of the most difficult conversations, other than telling our daughter that, my husband had cancer, her dad had cancer. That's when I think back about it, it was a tough conversation. So.
Right. Wow. That's those are two very powerful examples. Thanks for sharing them with us, Lynn.
I know that you have a bunch of examples as well. I mean, you've had all kinds of things that have happened, and I think another little one that I'm going to set, which is really toning it down, taking it simple. I had a situation with one of my boss, actually the best boss I ever had, the ultimate mentor. He was so great, but it was about terminating an employee, and I had some strong opinions about it, and we disagreed. And because he was doing that lesson, seeing the good in the other person, second chances. But 3 months later, he did end up letting that individual go. It wasn't the right fit for the team, and he started saying, "Well, yeah, you told me. You told me that this wasn't going to work out." And I immediately backed it down. It was like, no, this was a difficult situation, and you made the right call at that time, and it just didn't work out. And there's no right or wrong answer here. And it could easily have gone the other way. And by giving her the opportunity to correct her work performance and to make some changes, she could have turned into a star employee. But it just didn't work out that way. So it was in a way, it was a difficult conversation, because instead of going, "Yeah, I told you so," I didn't go there, right? But it was like, once again, giving that, my boss, dignity and respect, and seeing the good in him. And so I think that, and that's actually happened to me a couple times in my life, where I've just felt that somebody wasn't a good fit, and but it was, everyone does deserve that opportunity to make corrections and to pivot and learn and grow.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
Sometimes it works and they become amazing. So sometimes it doesn't.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a very fair way to look at when you're working with your colleagues in professional environment. No, I think that's the smart thing to do. I want to add two more things. When you're having these conversations, when you're planning for these difficult conversations, number one is that to be prepared you don't go in with an idea already formed, and like a mentality where you say, "This is my goal and I'm going to get it no matter what." I like to go, especially when you're having a conversation with another human being, to give yourself the opportunity to change your mind. And
Yes.
And I think that changing your mind has a bad rap. And I heard from especially in my 20s, I heard from men saying, "Oh, she's a woman, she's going to change her mind," when there's a very senior boss. And I was been very fortunate to have many superior female bosses, ministers, deputy ministers, directors, all female. And some of the resentment from some of the male colleagues, especially at the bottom, where, "Oh, she's going to change her mind. What do you expect? She's a woman." That's a very negative, non-productive way of looking at it. But regardless of what others say, I think the smart woman, the wise thing to do is to walk into a situation knowing where you stand, what your position is, what the issues are, but being open to learning and then shifting as you need. That is the wise thing to do, regardless of what others say. And on that note, on the other side of the coin, Lynn, I think you'd agree, is also the idea that you can always agree to disagree, right? Like you and I could say, "That's a wonderful idea, Tikiri. I agree with you. I disagree with you, but I respect your opinion." Right? And that leaves still an open relationship. It makes me respect you, and hopefully likewise. So I don't think that's So those are two things that I want to share if someone's planning to have a difficult conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are a lot of situations where there is no right or wrong answer, and I have seen so many organizations make a decision, and then it's like there's no way in heck they're going to change that decision, and that is a huge mistake. Every day we live in a time that's changing dynamically, and new facts and figures become available, new information, and we must be able to see that this worked for a while. It's not working now, so it's time for us to change our approach. It's time to pivot. I always talk about the paradigm, but how you approach the paradigm and the viewpoint and the prism that you're looking in. This is a big three-dimensional paradigm, and you're coming at it from all kinds of different angles, and from where you're looking at it, that's your perception, and that may be right there, but you're not considering some of these other perspectives. And that's when you open your mind to that, and you open, really that your mindset where you're going to embrace and listen and consider it. You'll find that maybe at that moment, it's like, well, we're going to still stay the course. But with this new information, we're gonna see how this is going, because if it's not successful or panning out, we're gonna go ahead and pivot. And so I call it a pivot, and it is. It's like, why can't people change their minds? I mean, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of in my life. And I think there are some things that even at a very core level that maybe there's some kind of core piece that, and I would never change my mind about being compassionate and being caring and being nice to other people. But, most things, we just live in a dynamic period where everything is changing moment to moment. And, that's just,
oh, I agree. I
huge
cannot
mistake.
agree with you
It's
more.
a huge mistake. And it's almost like this thing of hubris, like, oh my God, I'm right.
Yes.
And it's like,
that's true.
No, bud.
No, I read an interesting statistic that 80% of the corporations that are in the Fortune 500 list, about maybe at the beginning of last century, they no longer exist. Hubris got them. They decided that they were always going to do the way they were. They were big. They couldn't change. They couldn't move. And now they no longer exist. The small guy and girl who knew that they could pivot. And now we're moving this into the business world. But
Right.
I think it applies to everybody, whether you're an employee, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a big corporation. And look at what happened to those corporations that didn't decided, we don't have to give names, but if you look at the photography industry, you look at the video rental industry, you look at the toy industry, I mean, it's littered with dead bodies. Corporation dead bodies.
Innovate or die, right? But on the other hand, you don't want to be on the bleeding edge of that innovation. But you definitely have to. Sorry, I'm watching this gigungous bee. It was the size of Godzilla.
Oh. That's what happens when you're in the garden.
Yeah.
But you know what? I love your background, by the way. It's beautiful. It's
well,
gorgeous,
I thought I'd change a pace, right? I mean, I think it's that lovely. As spring and summer comes up, I actually often work out on the deck. I bring my computer out, my paperwork out, and I listen to my tunes. I'm doing all my emails, all my work, and working on projects. And but sometimes just changing your environment can help, once again, reframe your mindset, just like the conversation you said you're having. And I love what you're saying also when you're talking about negotiating for, let's say, a raise. And those pieces that are really important is knowing, there is some things that maybe you are not willing to negotiate on, but what are the areas that you are able to and willing to negotiate on? Because it's really about the total compensation package and coming in prepared as to why, what you've done, how you add value, that you deserve a promotion or a raise. So all those things are important as you take that into account. And, and there are situations and circumstances where um, a company can't do one thing, but they can do another. So, I've done that before. When you're switching jobs, especially in as executive, you may not be able to go in with 4 weeks of vacation, but you do 3 weeks the first year, and then you get 4 weeks, the next. I mean, there's just different things.
Right,
Maybe
right.
it's part of your expense package. So there's always, what's the wiggle room? And but then what is so core to you that you're not going, that it's just really important to you. So.
Right, right. You know this, the BATNA in negotiation, right? The best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Have that in your back pocket. You don't have to sit and do reams and reams of analysis or hours. Just sit down and ask yourself what your BATNA is. And for those of you who are wondering what it is, take a look at some of the basic, negotiations 101 that'll help you. But I like your idea of that there are always options. I manage teams in the most restrictive, bureaucratic environments. This is defense, intelligence, in a federal government environment where your hands are tied to, you're handcuffed and you're shackled to these processes, so process heavy. And human resources there, whether you're a manager or an employee, they're there to make you follow the process, right? So even in those environments, I only say that to say is that when an employee would come to me and say, my mother has terminal illness, I want to go on a vacation, there were times when we could find solutions. So think of it, if I could find solutions as a manager and as an employee, even in the most dire strict situations, exactly, then we can, and I think walking into a situation knowing that's possible, and we all have worked also with bosses who are inflexible, but that's not the end of the world, though. If that doesn't work in the long run, there are new jobs and there are other organizations. But I want to say we have 5 minutes to the top of the hour, or 3 now. So we've had a wonderful conversation. But was there any final words, Lynn, that you'd like to share? And then we can wrap up, because I know an hour is a long time.
Yeah, no, I think this has been great. I'm looking at my notes to see if I have anything else that, that really stands out. No, but I was thinking, like, for next time, sort of once again, a segue off of this one, but maybe, what are some of the conversations that you might have with your manager and how to approach them? So it's not necessarily a difficult situation, but it's like, how can you manage your manager? Does that make sense?
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. As a manager who had to manage her executives, there were times, when you're right in the middle and you're trying to do both, that gives you very interesting. But no, I love that idea. There's also another idea that we don't have to do it next month, but sometime in the future. And I'd love to hear the audience, what your questions are as well. But there's something, and I don't know how comfortable, Lynn, that you're tackling it, but in the era of the Me Too environment, I've been very lucky to work in environments where there are always places where I could go to if there are issues, and I haven't been subject to anything untoward. But that is a question that maybe some of the audience might be wondering. How do you deal with an environment of maybe there's a bit of harassment or questions that you don't feel very comfortable about? And I think you and I could give a lot of good advice for women who are maybe on an unsure relationship, or things are going a little bad and they're not sure how to, especially in an environment where you don't want to offend, you still want to do your job, and yet you're feeling very uncomfortable in a work environment. Anyway, that's an idea for the future, but I've just been seeing a few questions come up. So, if you guys out there are interested, let us know.
Yeah. I'm like you. I've had a few situations, but nothing that was, really horrible or icky. Yeah. So, I think the one thing that I encountered, I actually was bullied at work at one point in time when I was younger, and sort of, just finding that inner gumption, to address it. And once I had done that, it stopped. So that's one of the people. That's the first person on my pinky that the fortress is closed.
Oh yes, no, I hear you. But we could talk about bullying in general, really. I mean, if when it comes to the Me Too environment, that is bullying, whether it comes as whatever format it comes in. You're right. No, we could tackle it in the future. But I like your topic. So it's managing your manager for next in 4 weeks from now. And I'm just gonna, before we leave, quickly see if there are any questions. I don't see any, but I want to ask everybody. You've got Lynn and me both. Between Lynn and I, we've got half a century of private sector, public sector experience on 4 continents, or maybe 5. There's a lot of stuff that you can glean from us. So leave your questions below. Ask questions even, between these conversations. So Lynn and I can then make sure that we tailor our conversations to what your needs are. And if you have any questions, you and I, we can do a Q&A session anytime too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Lynn. Was there anything else before we say goodbye? But I want to say thank you so much for joining.
Well, no, thank you. It's just so great. It's so good to see you. Even though I've been looking at my camera and I'm not looking at you on the split screen.
Well, I love your background. I wish I had one of those. I have my. Maybe I should go down to the beach and. It's just going to be a little noisy, though. It's going to be a little noisy.
Yeah. That's why I'm wearing my headset in case there was they've got some people doing some different house projects around. But yeah, absolutely.
It wasn't too bad.
Sometimes we'll do it we're in the same place at the same time or at different sides of the table.
Oh gosh, we should do this together. And you can come up here, or I can come down, and maybe we should do a Facebook Live that'd be awesome. Well, thank you, Lynn. I always appreciate you sharing your wisdom. And we'll see you in, and thank you, Amanda. Thank you kindly, Amanda, for being there. And I know you're always there. And Michaela, you're there as well. And we have Rukia, and maybe I should say hello to everybody, but okay, now I can't. It's frozen. So we're just going to say thank you in general. Okay. And wishing you all an awesome week. And we'll see you in, thank you, Kiara. We'll talk to you soon. Okay, take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Lynn. Thank you.